Thanks for the intro. My name is Brendan Fife, and I'm pleased to be joining you from Toronto today. The St. Andrew Society here was created in 1836, and the society has gone through various iterations over the years, and we're experiencing a bit of a resurgence at the moment, which we're pleased to talk to you about. There's over 4.5 million Canadians who have Scottish heritage, and about 500,000 who live in the Greater Toronto area. So I think, like many of our societies, one of the things that we've really struggled with is that the society was getting older and older, and the majority of members were 60s and 70s, and we weren't having a lot of success in getting some people with darker hair on board, so to speak. But through some concerted efforts over the past few years, changing up our event schedule and our communications, and doing a better job of celebrating Canadians of Scottish heritage, as well as the incredible accomplishments of Scotland, we've created a bit of a beacon that has attracted a number of new people. And that's also been part of us being proactive and going out and finding influencers and content generators and other things for us. Besides connecting with those younger people of Scottish heritage, there's a fairly significant community in Toronto of recent Scottish immigrants. So our outreach to them is one of the things we can talk about as the session goes along. I'm pleased to have Rory and Cameron and Victoria join us today, and I can give some examples of things that we're doing. But on the broader context, we'll be talking about how our societies can engage better with people, say, in their 20s and 30s who have those connections. And that not only includes Canadians and Americans, but how can we welcome Scottish immigrants and make them feel part of our society? So I'm going to get each one of the participants to talk a bit about themselves and their organizations or their personal efforts. And we'll let the conversation lead us to a certain extent. So Rory, if we don't mind, if we could start with you, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your organization and what you're doing towards these goals and any success stories that you have, we'd love to hear them.
Thanks, Brendan, and thanks for everyone for having me back. So my name's Rory Heatherley. I moved to the US in 2018, and I actually also held the Deputy Head of the Scottish Government role prior to Ailey, who we've just heard from. I'm now quite heavily involved with a couple of Scottish organisations in the US, so the National Trust of Scotland Emerging Leaders Board and the Washington Tattoo Veterans Board. But my day job is I run the Saltire Foundation USA, which is a transatlantic internship program. It's a registered 501(c)(3) here in the US. I guess you would say I'm head of business development, but I'm a one-man band in the US. We have a sister organisation in Canada for our Canadian friends on the call, and we're headquartered out of Strathclyde Uni in Glasgow.
Excellent. Cameron, if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about yourself and your federation and what you've been up to.
Yeah, hello. And similarly as Rory said, pleasure to be back. It's always a great time being a part of the Scottish North American Community Conference. So some of you might know a bit of my story. I came to America when I was 17 for college to play soccer, as they call it here. Picked up lacrosse while I was in Western New York, which is quite near where Brendan lives, up in Toronto. And that's kind of the local game around there. That's one of the oldest game pretty much in North America. It's got a lot of history, and I was lucky enough to learn how to play it and actually learn from a lot of my friends who are native indigenous people of North America. And yeah, as I say, it's taken me a lot of places, and I'm actually back in Scotland this weekend right now. Because I'm training with the Scottish national lacrosse team again. So yeah, as I say, America is great. I now live there in Rochester, New York, with my wife and my son, and it's been very kind to me. America has. So thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing our next guest in a little bit more depth because she's very familiar to us here in Toronto. Part of our efforts of connecting with Modern Scotland was to find young Scots who are interested in sharing their visions about Scottish history and also, what their current culture was. And by an extraordinary piece of luck, the person that we connected with about historical issues also has an extraordinary passion for Canadian sport, which Victoria Stewart can tell you a bit more about now. Vic?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. I'm Victoria. I live in Dundee, Scotland, and as Brendan says, I both love Scottish history and promoting Scottish heritage, but I'm equally obsessed with hockey and baseball, coincidentally. So, I was quite the representative in a way for the St Andrews Society, and I've been working with them for about 5 years now, and I'm really proud to work alongside them at various events, both digitally and in person. Yeah, it's just a fantastic organisation to work with. I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time in Toronto and in Ontario in general, even though I still live in Scotland. I spend a lot of time out there, which I'm very, very grateful for. It's a fantastic place. It's basically a second home to me now, and that's really thanks to the St Andrews Society of Toronto. I have Brendan and the Society to thank for that. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks, Vic. So I think for our different organizations, if we talk about efforts that we've made and how our plans have changed, I think that would be helpful to other organizations to um, no plan stays intact once you start it, of course. And I know that for us, a lot of times when we were reaching out to say recent Scottish immigrants, they weren't particularly interested in what we had to offer, which was, we were talking a lot about our charity ball, which is kind of the tentpole event for the society, and of course our Burns dinners and whatnot. But for a lot of these younger Scots, they were, their focus was more about how do I find a job in Canada or in Toronto specifically? How do I find a reasonable place to live? And a lot of the events that we had were just priced out of their ability to pay for them. And they were also, quite frankly, outside their interest level. And going to events and talking about kilts and castles wasn't really on their priority list. So instead of like trying to, make people want the things that we had, we did a survey and started doing lots of in-person events, and we started creating things that people actually wanted. And that turned into a lot of pub nights and curling socials and more casual get-togethers that really, enabled these people to talk to society members. So it was a major shift from where we started to where we ended up. And I would say that the curling socials in particular have been a massive hit because, it's obviously a sport that was born in Scotland, but is beloved by Canadians. And so I'd encourage any of our, the organizations that are watching to certainly go down that path. And also our pub nights have been extraordinary as well. For our recent charity ball that just happened, we had a bit of an interesting obstacle, which was that Taylor Swift was in town for 6 dates. And even though the ball's been has over 100 years of history, that wasn't of importance to her because she made it very difficult for anybody to get a hotel in the city. But despite that, through all our smaller events, we were helped to build up a new legion of people that were loyal to the society. And we exceeded the number of people at the ball by 50 from last year, and we think that'll even be better next year. But Rory, I'm just wondering if you could tell us about, when you started your original vision, what it was for these types of engagement and, any roadblocks or any reshifting that you had to do.
Yeah, I think so. I am a lot of what you started with there, Brendan, chimes with where I found myself certainly over the last 6 years. Just now, in the role that I do, we're focused on connecting to young Scots through education. And I think alumni has been a common theme in some of the earlier sessions today, and I know that we'll finish today's conference session with an alumni focused event, so I'll not go over that chapter and verse. But I think when it's empowering young people to recognise their heritage and want to celebrate their sort of Scottish roots, I think you just need to put them in a situation where they feel passionate and they want to advocate for who they are, where they come from. I've seen that when we've brought Scottish students into the US. The point of difference with embedding these students within US businesses is that everybody within the US business wants to learn about who they are and where they're from. And there's a sense of pride to take from that. So I find it celebrating Scotland and celebrating the heritage and empowering people to talk about where they come from is a byproduct of putting them in other situations. And I would say to your point around trying to engage younger people and them not being interested. I think that what the key is to listen to what they want and then get really creative about giving them what they want in a better way than they could have ever imagined. And there's lots of examples of that across the US. There's some groups on this call today that have done it incredibly well, and I've seen that firsthand. So listen to what people want. We live in a world now where people are watching their bank balance, they are working longer hours. If they've got a finite amount of time to do something fun and engaging, you need to make sure that you're offering them the best thing that's possible. Otherwise, they're going to default to the norms of going to sports or music. Not to say that anything's bad in that sense. I would have rather attended the ball than Taylor Swift. But I think that you just have to listen to what people want in the here and now, and eventually we'll move away from the stigma attached to Scottish heritage and by extension the diaspora of it's an aging demographic and it's not really something that these young people want to be involved in, because I know firsthand from going to the events that that's not the case, but there is an association with what might have been there in the past.
Thank you very much. I think you make an interesting point to pick up on, which was that for a lot of them that we do find, once we can get them involved, some of the more traditional events, they really enjoy that. But it's not the first point of contact, like getting them to come out to that as their first event, especially because it's usually a fairly significant financial investment. We have to have things that were free or low cost to get them in, and for them to meet people their own age, which I also think is pretty important. Cam, we had a good chat earlier today about what your group was up to and how you had to change focus or change your plans a couple times, but could you please share that with the group?
Yeah, absolutely. So, over at the American Scottish Foundation, I'm very lucky to be a part of such an organization that prioritizes a cultural bridge between my homeland where I grew up and now my new life here in America with my family. Through college, when I was young, in the middle of COVID, the ASF had really given me a great opportunity to get internship hours and voluntary hours through that, which really helped me in terms of graduating that year. So I've always said that that kind of engagement that they had with me and supporting me getting through those kind of stages of my life, and I think as Rory says as well, connecting on what's important to people. Such as those hours help me graduate, so I don't have to go and spend another however many thousand on another semester. It's that sort of thing. You can really engage in those kind of respects. So we've seen that just purely by the kind of experience of the foundation supporting me through those kind of stages and with those opportunities, and then actually realizing that I'm not special. I'm not unique. There's hundreds and thousands of young Scots now coming to America to play sport, whether that be professionally, semi-pro, in college, in the NCAA. And it's fantastic to see. So there are definitely other opportunities out there to be connecting with people like myself that have come from Scotland to start a life here in the States. But also I think the landscape's changing as well. So the social media side, other things like that, that's a big part of it. But ultimately, I think it's about for us at the ASF, we've been engaging at that level of what do people want at the Highland Games? Do they want to connect with their lineage? How do they want to connect with their lineage? How do they want to be a part of it? And as I say, it's just the more we can get people in front of people and actually connecting over things that are important to them, whether that be, as we say, the whiskey, the culture, the food, the music, the sport, or just general love for Scotland. I think that's something we're always playing with and always trying to find new ways of doing, because I think we appreciate that the whole kind of modern Scotland's always changing. Young Scots are always changing in their priorities and preferences, but yeah, I think things are going pretty well at the moment for the kind of youth diaspora.
And as much as we talk about Highland Games and whatnot, things that are traditionally Scottish, just to finish our earlier conversation, Cameron, how important do you feel it was for you that you basically, like you said, you adopted and got interested in what is probably the oldest North American sport, and how that helped to introduce your culture to a broader group?
Yeah, I think cultural exchange is really important. It's fascinating. As I say, I've got a lot of friends now around the Buffalo area, Rochester area, and indigenous guys who just taught me how to play this game, taught me what it meant to them, taught me the history behind it, and that was a special experience too. So now, as I say, with my experience I have with lacrosse Scotland and being part of the Scottish national team now, um, I've got the luxury of being one of the few boys that learned the game out here. And I get to now take that back and also connect with, my Scottish teammates. And also by the same token, the American teammates that come back and travel home as international players, I get to connect with them too. So I think it's really important that, as I say, the ASF, we pride ourselves on being a cultural bridge between Scotland and America. And I think every one of us, as Scottish Americans or Scots or even Americans with a love for Scotland, we all have that opportunity every single day to kind of connect with that and share our stories, whether that's going this way across the Atlantic to Scotland like I just did, or going back towards North America. So yeah, connection and conversation and collaboration are the most important ways of keeping our kind of society and keeping our Scottish kind of group community going.
Thank you. And
Nice.
Victoria, I I often say that you're more Canadian than most Canadians. So, but I think we'll probably let you talk about how, you discovered our national game or our national winter sport anyways, and how that, how that matched into your fascination with Toronto and getting over here. But how did it start for you? And then how did it take an unexpected turn for you?
Yeah, so I discovered hockey through actually my hometown team. We have a professional league over here in the UK, which not too many people usually know about. So I discovered hockey through that, literally watching the Dundee Stars, who is where I'm from. I'm very proud of it. And so I got into hockey that way very quickly, found the Toronto Maple Leafs soon after, got obsessed with Toronto as well. Just there was just something about the city that just always appealed to me so much. And it was obviously fed into by my love of hockey. I love hockey more than most things in this world. I'm really passionate about it. And it really opened the door to Toronto for me. And I was really determined to go over. I really wanted to go, but I was still studying at the time. I was only in like my first or second year of university when Brendan found me, and it's thanks to the society that I was actually able to go over in the first place. I went over in 2022 for the first time. I was able to go to a Toronto Maple Leafs game, of course, and I also attended the charity ball, which was a fantastic experience. It was so nice to celebrate Scottish culture that way. I never envisioned that Scotland could be represented so well in Canada. I had studied history during my undergraduate degree, and I studied Scottish Canadian history, so I knew about the links, the connections, the roots, and it was something I was really interested in. But actually going and experiencing that in person was something completely that I'd never imagined before. I didn't realize how much passion there was for Scotland, somewhere that's so far away. It made me so proud to be a Scot. So I just felt so proud of my country, and I still do. Every time I come over, there's always some link to Scotland somewhere, and it just makes me so proud. So I get to enjoy both the Canadian hockey element. I also love baseball now too, and the Jays are also my team. But I get to be proud of Scotland at the same time, so it's the perfect combination.
And you love Tim Hortons and, all things Canadian in general. So, um,
Absolutely.
Rory, I'm just wondering for your charges that end up going into these businesses through the foundation, what do you find are their major misconceptions about what Americans think about Scotland and what you have to prepare them for, and kind of what their learning is, and how that has changed your course, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely that the young people that we're bringing out here, I should have mentioned earlier, they're very high performing talent coming out of Scottish universities. So they've gone through a series of testing and a few situations which have prepared them for coming out here and embedding themselves in American life. I think that if I was to give the sort of tongue-in-cheek answer, they should prepare themselves for talking a lot about, well, depending on the age of their host, Sean Connery as James Bond, Outlander, or Harry Potter. I think nowadays these young people want to be ambassadors for Scotland. They're likely studying something that is a flagship course within Scotland. I think if you look at any point throughout the last 300 years, Scottish education has kind of been the creme de la creme globally. So we've always sort of tailored our university courses to the jobs of the future. We had people this year, for example, coming out building AIs for US-based businesses. So I think that they kind of know that there's going to be the balance to be struck. To Ailey's earlier point in the session before, people in the US can't wait to tell you about their connection to Scotland, and we should absolutely capitalize on that. I think the key though is to strike the right balance between the sort of historic, sort of mythical love affair of Scotland and the sort of contemporary modern Scotland that we see now. And actually, the program that I'm now running with these interns, their day job is to do the modern and the contemporary, and the education on the more general Scotland can go into that sort of more trivial cultural exchange.
Thank you very much. Cam, we had an earlier conversation where we talked about, what before you came over to the United States, what your preconceptions were and what they were based on, and then, how you feel about it now. And I guess if you could first talk about what you find that, North Americans get wrong about their perception of Scotland, and then in turn, what were you surprised about, or what was new to you based on what your boots got on the ground here?
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? For kind of how alike we are and how different we are. We do have kind of skewed misconceptions going both ways across the Atlantic. I think that the thing that surprises Americans so much when I kind of will share pictures or show them, my trips I go back to Scotland is, hey, of course, yeah, how green it is and how lush and hilly and stuff, but also how close everything is together, how small the roads are, and I mean, I always say like in America now, I live a very not maximalized lifestyle, but the roads are wide. I drive a nice old truck. It's funny that kind of stuff, that the conception of gas and petrol and stuff, and how cheap it is in the States too. There's a lot kind of there's a lot kind of ideals that are just different. Driving. We were talking there, just me and you earlier, Brendan, about how big Ontario is, for instance. And how big Canada is. There's some parts of Canada that are just pure wilderness still, of course. Um, Small drive for me. I just drove to Philadelphia to go train from Rochester to Philadelphia. It was about 5 hours, 5.5 hours, and it was nothing. I would never ever do that drive here in Scotland. Um, it's amazing. I think that with me, I was growing up watching a lot of American films, TV shows, etc. So you have a kind of idea of, like, just a kind of perception of the buildings and what everything looks like. And that's what surprised me when I got there, was that a lot of things actually did just look like how I expected. Um, which was really strange, because and I think going the other way, um, a lot of American people that I meet, or that my friends that have come to visit me in Scotland, for instance, what they're like just really surprised at, I think, is if I take them to the Central Belt where I live here, through Glasgow, Edinburgh, all the wee connecting towns and stuff, they're like, oh, I thought it was all the Highlands. Everybody that I've met and talked to that kind of fantasizes and wants to move to Scotland. As I say, I think I was telling you earlier, it's a thatched cottage in a glen. And I was saying to them, there's a lot more, like, kind of closer living, like in the Central Belt, and there's also a lot less jobs in some of these areas too. So you'd more than likely be living where I am. So it's like a romanticized and fantasized version. But as you said earlier, what can we expect when we make our national animal a unicorn? At the end of the day, we're very, very fantastical and romanticized and much admired and revered place. And I think that's also because of the travel, like how invested and integrated Scots are in America now. A lot of people have, as Rory was saying, Ailey was saying, people want to tell you about that, and how Scottish they are. And that's brilliant, because at the end of the day, they have an appreciation and a love for that too. So there's a lot of differences, but a lot of similarity. I think the main thing is, we're more alike than we are different, personally, as American people, North American people, and Scots. Because at the end of the day, it was our grandparents, great grandparents, and such, and ancestors that really kind of helped America kickstart, and had a big part in that. So, of course, we're gonna have a lot of similarities, but they've kind of taken a lot of things and ran with it, as we all know. So that's what makes America America, and I love a lot about what makes Scotland Scotland. So It's brilliant.
Brendan,
Yeah.
if I could just pick up on something that Cameron touched on there. So it's it was bizarre to me that moving to an English speaking country that there would be a language barrier, but there is somewhat a language barrier.
Yep.
And I remember when I moved here as a diplomat, you got given a list of English words and the American English version of them. So like it could be trivial things like bin bag and trash bag, but what I've found over the last few years is that especially when you're talking in business, there is a disconnect between some of the language that's used. And this actually was a real catalyst for moving the goalposts within the internship program that we have. So we recognized last year that any marketing collateral and the UK-based website for our program wasn't talking to an American audience like it should. So we actually pivoted, and in the last few weeks, we've brought a US version of the website online that not only talks to very tangible things that have happened in the US, but it also Americanizes the language so that it does resonate with businesses. So if we're using that as an asset, as a sales tool, they've got something that they understand on their day-to-day, rather than trying to interpret what we would be digesting on the UK side of it. So
Right.
it's a subtle thing, and it's not major, especially if you get if you get somebody on the phone, you're not going to struggle to communicate with one another. But there's terminologies that creep into everyday life that there is a disconnect on.
Yep. Great insights. Cam, just one last thing that we talked about earlier was, we have sometimes we have this homogenous view of what certain cultures are going to look like. And being that you've been able to travel so far across the lower 48, what advice could you give to other Scottish immigrants about, the different regions of the United States and I guess to a certain extent Canada and what they can expect?
It's as I say, it's mind blowing. I think when I was talking to you earlier, I'd said about flying out to Arizona to officiate my friend's wedding for them in the middle of a desert, and I'm Scottish. I've never seen a desert before. So going out and seeing cactus and stuff was unbelievable. But even at that point, you travel across and you're looking out the plane window and the terrain's changing. Like almost like every state you go, the terrain's changing. Um, and I think like what I'd say to Scottish people immigrating out to America is there's something for everybody. I live in New York State, which is great. There's in a lot of ways. I think it's quite similar to kind of what I grew up in and a lot of the values and stuff here. But there's if you want to go to Texas, go to Texas. If you want to go to California and live that lifestyle, go to California. I've also said as well, like in terms of like a homogenous view of Texas, go and visit Austin. I invite a lot of people to go and visit Austin, Texas, and see how different that is too. So it's amazing that I think especially growing up in Scotland with us being such a small kind of tight country as well, that view of the America is all kind of that that one thing. It's amazing, and the same going for Scotland. I think a lot of people think based off of Braveheart and then Train Spotting and whatever else. There's quite a few different views of Scotland, but somehow we all still manage to get thrown into this homogenous view of as I think Roy was saying earlier, the fantastical and fanatical and magical, which Scotland can be and is. But yeah, I think there's that kind of that view that it's a very diverse place as well, and it's not just one thing. Not everybody is. I mean, as Ailey was saying earlier, Ailey is what everybody expects you to look at, like as a Scottish woman. With me as well, with a bit of red in my hair, or like, again, it's you don't expect to see a lot of the kind of culture that Scotland possesses. And I think that's really wild to a lot of my American friends to come and visit and see just how diverse we are as a people. And it's amazing. It's really amazing. So. Yeah.
I think one of the things that we often find when we're talking to our recent Scottish immigrants is that they find it hilarious when random Canadians come up to them and say, "Oh, I'm Scottish as well," and they depending on how they are, it's you can get a very mixed reaction. I think one of the things I would recommend to Scottish immigrants is that they have to realize that that is the way that Canadians and Americans speak to each other, because it's implied that we're Canadian or American, so we often reference our heritage when we're talking to each other, which I think given that context, it might help them to understand it a bit better. And I think for a lot of us, we got involved in societies for different reasons, and it's not always about modern Scotland. Like in my case, it was about celebrating the grit and tenacity of my Scottish ancestors to, leave their homeland and try to find a better life across the Atlantic and endure an extraordinarily difficult journey that they may not survive, and then basically have to fight for food every day. And whenever I think of my challenges in life, they're so small compared to them, that my ancestors are such an inspiration to me. And being involved in the society has given me a much better connection and appreciation of modern Scotland. And a lot of that has been thanks to Victoria and her insights. But Victoria, when you came here, as we've talked about, a lot of Canadians seem to think that everybody should look like someone from Outlander, which isn't always going to be the case. But what were the points of pride that you kind of picked up just casually in Toronto about seeing all these Scottish connections?
I just see so many examples of people who are clearly proud of their heritage, no matter how far back that goes. I mean, it can be people who are, they're direct like immigrants over, or it can be people who like their great grandparents came over. Like, it doesn't matter to them how far back it goes or how close it is. To them, they're just as proud of it. And I just think that's amazing. I think it's fantastic to be so proud of where you've come from or where your ancestors came from, that you feel the need to like talk about it with such passion. And I've come across many people in Toronto that they're just so excited to tell me about their Scotland story. And whether it's, the time that their like grandparents came over, or even people who don't have the ancestry, people are always desperate to tell me about that time that they went and played golf in St Andrews, because it's one of their best memories. And I just think that that signifies just how important Scotland is on a global scale, because we are a small part of the world. And when you look at the size of us compared to most other nations, we are absolutely tiny. So the fact that we have that significance, I think, is something to really be proud of. And I constantly come across people who they're just so excited to ask me about what part of Scotland I'm from. And most of the time they know where I'm from. And I'm from Dundee, which isn't, one of the biggest cities in Scotland. It's not Glasgow, it's not Edinburgh. And yet the majority of people still know exactly where that is. And if not, they know somewhere nearby. And I just think it's fantastic that Scotland can be so significant in that way. And I think it's something to really be proud of. And Ontario as a whole definitely has that pride.
Thank you very much. We've reached our time, so I wanted to thank all our panelists for being involved. And if there's any questions, we are happy to take them. And if not, we can move on to the next segment.
Victoria, it looks like Bob wants you out to a Red Wings game.
Oh, I'd love to go to a Red Wings game. Original six matchup. That'd be great. Yeah.
That's a good one, actually. Yeah. Good.
Okay, I think we can probably wrap this
Awesome.
one up. But thanks everybody for being involved.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening.